You're watching Black Agenda Report. I'm Margaret Kimberly. Today we're discussing deed theft, the taking of property by illegal or unethical means. It's now rampant in New York City and other cities, where Black homeowners are particularly vulnerable to the loss of property through frauds, forgeries, conservatorship, and other means which take properties away from families, as speculation and market manipulation have increased the value of homes. We're joined by Leah Goodridge. She's a New York City-based tenants' rights attorney, a housing advocate, and a writer who is also a member of the City Planning Commission. She joins us from New York to discuss the issue of deed theft and property loss and what steps are necessary to protect homeowners. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's so many places I would like to start. First of all, the definition of deed theft.
Yeah.
I feel like the term implies it's just someone stealing a deed. It's some forgery or fraud, but it's much deeper than that. Maybe we should call it property theft. But tell us what deed theft is.
Yeah, deed theft is when someone takes the title to a house, oftentimes using forgery or fraud or deception. So oftentimes the homeowner doesn't know. So that's deed theft. But I want to say that, there is a spectrum of deed theft. And one of the things that I've been annoyed about, and quite frankly, enraged, I was about to curse, but I enraged about, is that there's now this nitpicking now that deed theft has finally gotten attention, because let's rip the Band-Aid off. There's been deed theft going on for decades in Black communities. We've been recognizing it. This isn't new, but now that it's finally getting some attention from all corners, suddenly now there's some nitpicking, like, oh, I've heard, that family, that's not a deed theft, that's a family dispute. That's an internal family dispute. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's not deed theft. I've seen even articles, that's not really, is it deed theft or is it like something else? Because you're trying to frame the victims as the villains. They're trying to frame them as frauds, trying to game the system, instead of going after these very sophisticated criminals who have been getting away with it for decades. So let me give an example.
Okay.
I organized a town hall last night, and at the town hall, one of the lawyers who I invited on the panel, he talked about how he currently has a client who he was in jail. The client, the man who owns the house, he was in prison for quite some time, but he owned the house, and his brother came to visit him in the prison and said, "Hey, I want you to sign, some papers, and it's about like da-da-da-da." And he signed it because it's like his brother, not knowing that he was actually signing over the title to the house to his brother. That's an example of deed theft.
Okay.
So another example to me, which this is where, some of these news articles are like, oh, is it really deed theft? Is where you have a house, and let's say I live in the house, and then let's say my sister owns 15% of this house, 15% interest of this house, right? And then my sister, developers and investors and speculators start, contacting my sister like, hey, will you sell us your portion, your 15%? And then she's like, okay, yeah, whatever. I don't live there. I'll sell it. She doesn't tell me. She doesn't have to. And then after she sells it to them, they force a sale to own the entire thing, partition, right? That technically, they're not naming that as this is what some of these cases are, which now it's like, oh, that's not deed theft. But not what they're not saying is it's property fraud. They're trying to frame it as, oh, we don't have politicians, there was a correction with one of the cases with Chiosei, which he was fighting against. This is
councilman.
The city council member that was arrested. And then all of a sudden now there are these, Tish James said, which Tish James corrected, but they said, oh, it's not really deed theft. And it's like, okay, it's property fraud. Okay, so what now?
Well, it seems to me this, as you put it, this nitpicking is an effort to shut Black people up. about
agree.
being victimized. And I think it's particularly insidious because, Black neighborhoods, Brooklyn seems to be the epicenter because Brooklyn was the epicenter of Black life in New York. Kings County, that's Brooklyn, had the biggest Black population of any county in the whole country. So you have these huge swaths of homes, and you mentioned Bedford-Stuyvesant, but other communities. And now, because of market manipulation, now these homes are worth a lot.
A lot.
And first we were redlined and Black people were told, well, you're going to live in that neighborhood. Now somebody comes in and says, oh, we've decided your neighborhood is quote unquote hot.
Yeah.
And so they come in with these frauds. So it's very, very insidious, the impact on Black people, isn't it?
I mean, yes. And to be honest, I was like, this is a hate crime, to be honest. You're targeting Black communities. I mean, literally, this to me is a definition of a hate crime. You are targeting for a crime Black communities because not only that you are going to make a bang for your buck, it's not just about the finances, but it's also that you are aware that they are less protected, and they are. Because look at how this has been going on for decades. And now that we're finally having, some measure of, now we have the deed theft office, which to be honest, I still don't know what's going on with that. But, now we have some things, but even still, this is what my hope is. And this is what came out of the town hall last night is we don't need another office to treat this as a know your rights. Like, hey, we want to teach you guys, we want to teach homeowners like how to avoid or prevent deed theft. We need the government to do its job. So when I'm talking about the government, I'm talking about, why are notaries and attorneys able to go down and record a deed without the homeowner knowing at the city clerk's office? Why, when a 93-year-old woman went and she had her home stolen by deed thieves, and she had heart issues, she couldn't make it to court. She told the judge, she said last night that the judge in New York City was like, oh, I don't know, that's not a good enough reason to postpone the case. And the case went on. And she's 90 something years old. She's had her home in Brooklyn for 50 something years, right? So that's another one. That's the judge, right? And then we have the actual prosecution. Now we have this is where the nitpicking narratives play a huge role when it comes to law. I'm a city planning commissioner, but I'm also a lawyer, and narratives are a huge role. When you start nitpicking to say, this is not really, you're basically saying, this does not fit within the definition of something I can prosecute something for. But let someone jump a turnstile, right? Suddenly you want to send them away for life, right? You want to make up crimes. So I think that this is, to me, the targeting of Black communities is very insidious, and it has not been what I feel. And I felt this myself, but also in the room, it's just a lot of rage and a lot of grief. Because the other element of this is that, listen, we have a lot of Black folks who like to, I've been I'm in housing policy. Whenever I bring up, I brought up, an elderly lady is facing eviction. The first thing people say? Why did she buy a house? No empathy, nothing. No, why didn't she buy a house? There's a lot of weird respectability politics when it comes to housing, specifically in our community. So one of the things that came out of this town hall is a lot of people, they were glad to have a space to feel free without judgment and shame, because once one person stood up and said, hey, my house got stolen, it was like a ripple effect. Everyone in the room started standing up like, oh, actually, yeah, this happened to me, because people were scared at first, because you have these people like, oh, why didn't you do your paperwork? Like, oh, this is a property dispute. Your family did this. Go deal with them. Judge. All of that is judgment and not support, and not understanding that this is an entire scheme of investors and speculators and companies who have a very sophisticated system of targeting these families to get their property.
Well, that's something very peculiar to this country, this notion that if anything bad happens to you, it's your fault. So it's something I'm not actually surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
And respectability politics is a huge problem, which some of us take in and accept, which is very, very unfortunate. So you're talking about the need for regulations. You're talking about the need for new laws, like such as what? What would you like to see?
They need to be prosecuted. So so the other part of this is that it wasn't until 2022 where we had a very specific law for a specific law naming deed theft. Can you believe that? Before then, it was under the cloak of, oh, is this larceny? Is this fraud? Is this forgery? But now this is another part of it too. Now people are like, oh, is it deed? We just came up with, they just started naming that, but this has been going on. How many years have we had in Bed-Stuy and other Black communities that have a very high Black population where a speculator came to my door and tried to take my house. It's been going on for a very long time. So I think there's one part of it is regulation, but another part of it is there is a problem when people are going to court. A lot of people in the room last night described like the judges just being like, yeah, well, what can we do? You're like, oh, you're the judge. You're the judge. Another part that was very disturbing is that we had a lot of stories of where they caught the deed thieves. They were prosecuted. They went to prison or whatever. And these people still don't have their house. That's another problem. They're still wrapped up in surrogates court, still with the other, with not the criminal part, but the other part. They caught, like, for example, one of the people who spoke last night, the deed thieves, they had like several families that they targeted in Queens. Now, in their case in Brooklyn, this person's been in jail before, whatever, did the same exact number to this family. And now it's like, well, you got to handle it in surrogates court and see if you can. And, this is money. You don't always get a free attorney for this. And sometimes you're not eligible for a free attorney because, again, if you're a homeowner, you might not be on the income guidelines to get a free attorney.
Wow. So you just mentioned something. You said lawyers and notaries can record a deed and the owner doesn't know. So that's the sort of thing that you think should not be allowed, should not be permitted.
Yeah. I think there needs to be, like, at the county clerk's office, there needs to be a barrier, another mechanism to triple check to see if the homeowner is aware that they're selling over, because a lot of people think that they're refinancing their home and they're actually signing a deed, signing it over to somebody else, but they think that they're refinancing their home. So there needs to be a triple checking. Some of these notaries, a lot of the lawyers, they are barred, but they're fraudsters and they've had bar complaints, so I am hoping that this new deed theft office, what my hope is that they focus almost entirely on enforcement and regulation rather than this sort of like, know your rights. Like, we know what's going on. Everybody else has been catching up, so we need not only enforcement, but to really look at who are the players that make deed theft happen. So, you have the attorneys, these fraudster attorneys, sorry to say of my profession, you have the notaries, and then you have whoever's at the county clerk's office that is approving this. And then when they go to court, judges also need to be trained on this as well. Now because we have the laws, all of this is property fraud. So there shouldn't be any nitpicking about whether this is deed that, it's fraud. But when you have these narratives really trying to frame the victims as trying to get one over, let's not kid ourselves that doesn't have an impact in a judge's mind.
Well, of course it does. And judges, lest we forget, these are not people. They're not on the bench because they're friendly to the people or because they believe in democracy. It's very strange system in New York where judges are sort of elected, but elected officials pick them, and it's a very strange thing.
Yes,
And
this is not in like housing court judges, for example, who I should say, the public advocate and I, we did a tour last week of housing court because this is where I practice, and it was with the chief administrative judge, and he was incredibly, they're trying to change the culture up there, but they mentioned they've had some cases, but most of these deed theft cases are not in housing court, which is eviction court. They are happening in surrogates court, in other parts of civil court. And I think part of what is going on is there is a little bit of the law is being treated as a gray area for this issue, because there is a lot of nitpicking about, is it really theft? And it's like, well, yes. And so some of it is like, oh, if your family member signed it over, is it really theft? And it's like, well, you didn't know about it, and they targeted your family. So what are we doing here?
That's very sad to me that family. I've read in some of these cases these lawyers who specialize in this fraud, they go looking for heirs. So they'll find a cousin. Well, he's, an heir of grandma who owned the house, so he has a right, and they'll go to that person who unfortunately does not speak up for themselves or their families. So it's still fraud. I'm not trying to defend it, but it's tragic. It's tragic to me that there are situations where family members don't do the right thing.
Yeah, you should. One thing that should change is, as of right now, apparently, if you own a fractional interest of property and you want to sell that, you don't have to consult with the other people. That should not happen. That's an example. That should be the other people. Everyone who has a stake in that house should be aware of that and should have to agree with it or sign off. You should not be able to do that, because this is what these speculators are doing. They're able to use that 15% of the pie and then bring an entire partition sale and then take over the entire property. So this is a problem. I'm going to be honest. There was a part in the town hall where I felt, as soon as I said it, I felt a little guilty. I talked about how, for myself and many of my friends, we actually have no idea what is going on in our family with property. We don't know, because it's considered rude. It's almost considered like, if you act like you're the child, it's almost considered, if you ask, like, what are you asking for? So I don't know if I would term it financial literacy, but it's more of I guess, a culture thing. And I felt bad immediately bringing it up, because we're getting teetering real close to that, like, blame the victim, or try to say it's financial literacy. But I couldn't help but think about that in these cases where it's like, how could you selling off property and then not speak to your sibling, But one thing about that is, we had a journalist there, and her name is Samantha Maldonado from the city. And she was talking about how she's had these cases and a lot of them are estranged. And we were really trying to suss out, do they specifically target families where there is estrangement specifically? And then they go after that relative because they know they're probably not talking to their as opposed to, siblings who talk to each other or something. Because that's another thing too. A lot of these cases, the relative who sells it off, who jumpstarts the whole thing, is an estranged relative. So the question is, well, how do they know that?
Yes, it's interesting. Or maybe it's that the estranged person is the one who would do it. Maybe if you had a good relationship with your family, you would not even think to do that.
Right.
But the issue is, now we know that Mayor Mamdani announced this deed theft office, but it's not clear what it's going to do. Or is it?
I honestly, I looked up the website, and I didn't find a website to figure out what it is. I don't know that they have a website yet. Now I am hoping that it is not going to be a bunch of know your rights. It's not about training people and homeowners it's about literally prosecuting the thieves. It's about sending a message and having the government take a very strong arm here and prosecuting the thieves. You can tell people all day, go on Acris, New York City, monitor your this doesn't actually do anything, right? And so there's not really much that you can tell a homeowner to do to prevent this, because a lot of this is outside of their hands if it's like another relative selling something and they want to do it. So a lot of this really is going to have to be enforcing some laws, getting some other laws on the books, and regulating the different players, and maybe also training some judges.
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered thing because, if you allegedly know your rights, but it's actual. Am I right in saying that some fraud is, while we say it's fraud, it's not illegal? Am I correct?
Yeah. So, like, for example, yes. So, for example, if number one, you don't have to have your relatives know that you're selling off a portion of your property. But what is happening in a lot of these cases is the way that they're getting those relatives to sell them. A lot of times they are using deception. They're saying, here's what your property is worth. It's worth this much. And it's actually worth they're using I think we discussed it last night. I think it was called like the land value or something else they're showing, not the assessed value. And a lot of people just look at that number, go, oh, it's not even that much. And then they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. I don't want to be bothered with this. And then they sell it to them. So a lot of the speculators are using some form of deception to get the relative to sell their interest, so that they could take it over. But, this is, again, they shouldn't even be able, this should be a non-issue. They should not be able to do that, especially when someone else, if someone else is actually living in the house, that's the other thing too. Yeah. Like you have someone living in the house, yeah, so it's there are a lot of different areas of this, and I just hope that, I was also very cognizant of the fact that just a tiny little bit about me. I'm a city planning commissioner. The city planning commission votes on land use proposals. So those are mostly housing proposals. Will you approve that this housing will be built and will have an extra floor, or it could be changed from this zone to that zone? That's it in a nutshell. So deed theft as a topic is not something that's central to the city planning commission. So I organize this a bit outside of my capacity. But one thing I became very cognizant of in doing this is a lot of the people the cameras are there, and then after all is said and done, they're still fighting in court for their property. They still don't have an attorney. They're spending all their money. Now they can't afford an attorney anymore. And now it looks like they're going to lose their property. So it's like, yes, now we have this attention being paid to deed theft, but like in terms of the actual movement that they're expecting from government officials, from what I've heard from people, it's not happening. They're not being prosecuted because of all of these, like, is it really deed theft? Can we get them? Is this a juicy case? And it's like, they're like, God, we want our property. Like, what are you guys doing? This is a
it seems to me very basic. If you didn't want to sell your property and somehow it came into somebody else's hands, it's fraud. It's illegal. Yeah. If it happened without your permission, but you use the word movement, and I'm wondering, could this not be the beginning of a political movement? Because elected officials, they don't act on anything unless they're pressed to do so. Could this not be the start of a people's movement?
Of course. I think I'm also, maybe I'm letting my own personal feelings get in the way, but I myself in my personal life am just at a point, I think, especially to be honest, after the election, I'm tired. I do not want people telling me to organize, I'm like, you organize. Like, this is not fun.
I know, except that they don't.
We need to do something, like, as government. instead of telling people like, you go as people and let's organize. Like even when I think I have a particular grievance now with forcing. I'm very cognizant as a government official of telling people to organize when I'm like, I am the government official. And even if I'm the city planning commissioner, this might not be exactly within my purview. At the end of the day, government officials, we do have the capacity to do something. So I don't have to tell people.
Well, I was referring to elected officials. They have to run for office. They have to be voted. People have to vote for them. Now, there are people who have access to them, the people we're talking about, people with money and connections. They tell them what to do. They organize themselves for nefarious ends on this issue and other issues. I mean, I get your point. I wouldn't want to say that to someone who is in the midst of this crisis personally, but I think it's an example of what happens, or rather, in this case, what doesn't happen if elected officials aren't feeling any pressure.
Just so people are clear, I'm not meaning to say that the government should not take any action. I think, what I'm saying is I'm very cognizant, because a lot of people are like, oh, move. And I think where I'm at is like, where I walk away from this is like, how do I work? Like, how do we really, like, even if there's a deed theft office, right? There's going to be deed theft. My mind is like, I just want to make sure a lot of this burden is not put on people. Like, I don't like all.
I see what you mean. Yes, I understood what you were saying, but I got what you were saying. But it's an age-old problem, isn't it? Where the people need so many things, and there are people who get what they want all the time. They go to elected officials. They give them money. They're part of powerful organizations. And they call the shots at City Hall or in Albany. And they're always getting what they want, which is why nothing has been done about this up until now. And it's a big question. I'm not expecting you or me to answer it right now, but it's a bigger issue of how the people get what they want. And who will act on our behalf? Nobody. If they, squeaky oil gets the squeaky oil. I messed that up. But anyway, you know what I mean. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's what I was trying to say. So how do people, ordinary working, that's the other thing, or people who are working more than one job, and maybe they're what's the expression, house poor. They own a property, but they don't really have any other assets or cash. It's a big question, but how do we advocate for ourselves and for those folks? And that's something that I think we should be pondering.
Yeah, I think one ask is for there to be an investigation, right? Mm-hmm. Where is the we could have, this could be a literal civil rights investigation. Mm-hmm. We should be having congressional hearings about this, quite frankly. And it should be an entire investigation. This is what I mean when I say, in an example, the people putting in the labor, and most of the labor need to be like in the government. This is like, mm-hmm. an example, right? Yeah. So not task force where we have like seniors come out and give it, no, we already know what to do, right? And so congressional investigation, that's one thing. And then I think, another thing is some type of oversight committee, mm-hmm. A joint, because we could have the Department of Aging, the Department of Health, the Division of Civil Rights, all of these issues together, because this is a mental health issue. A lot of the folks that are being targeted are seniors, and they're doing it specifically because they know that they are not going to have the energy to fight back. They know that. A lot of these folks who came last night, mm-hmm. One lady was 93 years old.
Yeah.
And she was just saying, she's the one who said, I am too tired to go to court. Right?
Yeah.
This is what they want. And so this is not just an age, this is a race issue, an age issue. Department of Aging should be about civil rights issue. So I think having joint government agencies be involved, having congressional hearings, the Congressional Black Caucus, for example, should be involved in this. So these are some big asks, because I think not only do we want to stop the deed thieves, but we do want to have a greater understanding about who are these people and what are the schemes? How did they come into power? And who is backing them? Because that's my thought. Because I'm like, who the hell is at? How are you filing this at the county clerk's office, right? Like who? Like And one of the things that came out last night is there are multiple. Like it's not just one group. One example was one homeowner was a Haitian woman. The deed theft was a Haitian woman, right? And so sometimes some people, there was a guy, he was from Peru, and I think he had his house in Park Slope, and the deed theft was also Latino. And so sometimes even just that familiar face, you think you're refinancing and someone's helping you.
Yeah.
That's how they get you, because they think, and then some of the deed thefts are white men, right? So you have the whole gamut, but I think we would benefit from an investigation into but who are you paying to make this happen? Because it's not just these group of people. To me, it has to be more like you must be paying off people to be able to not just have this recorded in offices, but also like when you're in court, like this is.
I think you're right. There obviously does need to be an investigation, but also going back to my point, the governor runs for re-election this year, doesn't she? This should be an issue. This should be an issue that she should be pressured to address with legislation. I mean, you've talked about some very specific things that could be done.
So Councilmember Chiosei had to me what is not only a reasonable ask, but his ask was, hey, if there is alleged deed theft going on and that person is now facing eviction, the homeowner is facing eviction, then that eviction should be paused, like frozen, until the deed theft, because that's one court when they're facing eviction from their home. So until the deed theft case is settled out. And even that, the governor apparently is like, we're waiting to hear on that. And I think that's like at the bare minimum, right?
I think so.
I sort of paused where I'm like, we're the stuff that we're asking on the bare minimum for, or at least that Councilmember Chiosei has asked for the bare minimum for. It's like, what is the deal? So I don't want us to. One takeaway from this is I don't want us to say, oh, there's a deed theft office. That's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't end there.
No, it can't. It can't. But I thank you so much. We're almost out of time. Not only are you an attorney and a public official, you're also a writer. How do we find out about your work?
You can find me on social media. My handle is Leah from Brooklyn, and that's spelled LeahFromBklyn. So I'm on Instagram and trying to get off Twitter, but I'm still on there for now.
Well, I am too. It's like I'll be on until they kick me off. It's like, you do get the bang for your buck there. But anyway, that is another story. But I thank you. It's this is our first video interview. That housing is such an important issue. And
I also just want to apologize to your audience. I am a little hyped up because I'm coming out of this town hall yesterday, which was very emotional. So I apologize to your audience if I seem like I'm rambling.
No, you're not. You're not rambling at all. And I think sometimes we need to be hyped up. I think that can make things happen. It can make us. It can energize us. So I think this idea that. That's not a necessary thing or not a good thing. We need to see emotion. I think we need to see that more often about these issues that are impacting so many people's lives, things that are wrong and need to be righted. And somebody needs to say it with the emotion that you did, that this is wrong, it's gone on too long, and it needs to stop. So I think it was fine. Thank you. And that was Leah Goodridge, an attorney with the New York City Planning Commission, discussing the issue of fraud, deed theft, and the loss of property.